stuck in the middle with Chewie. Chapter 2. What's Wrong with Chewie? It began with a slight twitch in his left eye and a clenched fist as a strange sense of despair infiltrated the once calm and collected Wookiee. The hairy creature began to furiously scratch at the base of his silky forehead whilst breathing out a deep and unsure pant. Han's gaze fixated upon Chewie's once gleaming features, noticing an instant change within him.
"You okay, bud?"
Han inquired with qualities only the most empathetic nurse could possess.
"You don't look so good."
Han stretched out his rough-skinned palm and caressed the cheek of the slightly uneasy Chewbacca. The Wookiee replied with an ear-piercing shriek that shook the entire ship and caused the smuggler to jump back in fright.
"Don't call me a faggot, Chewie. I was just checking your fur for space sickness fleas."
Han retorted in defense, but this only caused the furry figure to enrage with even more climax. Chewie roared and began to flail his arms before running up and down the ship.
"I wasn't trying to seduce you, pal. I swear I'm as straight as the days are long."
Han pleaded. The Wookiee continued his unruly rampage. He began to bang on the computer consoles with increased vigor, before squatting down onto the floor to release a monster shit, which splattered down the walls and began to slither like Jabbar.
"That fucking stinks, Chewie. I've only just mopped these floors."
Solo pointed out whilst trying to figure out what on Kashyyyk was going on. Galaxy. Meanwhile, within the confines of Jabbar's sordid palace,
Alexa, play Jabba and Greedo's romantic playlist.
Playing Jabba and Greedo romantic playlist.
Greedo began to coat his long and bendy fingers with the lustrous bantha oil. Greedo invited the strongly potent smell into his nostrils as he exhaled with a longing and sexually frustrated sigh. It had been far too long since the olive-skinned Rodian had felt this good. Greedo stared into his reflection filled with dissipation whilst contemplating the impending and unspeakable acts he was about to perform, causing his body to tremble with anticipation. Swinging the doors open, Greedo's luminous violet eyes were treated to the sight of Jabbar laying upon a bed of Ithorian rose petals.
"Are you ready yet, Greedo? And yes, my voice has changed as well, because my balls finally dropped."
Jabbar asked with an intensity that Greedo had grown accustomed to.
"My body awaits your supple touch."
Greedo sachets into the dimly lit bedroom, and his hands magnetize towards Jabbar's disheveled skin. He slowly and delicately massages his inviting shoulders and flaccid foreskin until the glistening oil reveals the Rodian's own image, creating an aroused grin across his alien lips.
"Are you taking advantage of the reflective properties of my surface?"
Jabbar inquires whilst buttering a slice of space bread. A blush encompasses Greedo's cheeks as he scrambles to quickly change the subject, failing to ignore the almost blue ball-inducing growth within his undergarments.
Jabba.
The Rodian pipes up with a shy tone to his voice. Jabbar replies with a disinterested yet extremely horny grunt.
Why were we laughing earlier, when that gay bastard and hairy moth escaped from us?
Well, everyone knows that Wookiees are the second most claustrophobic creatures in the universe. So when we cut the fuel lines,
we trapped them together in that ship with no escape.
Greedo interrupts with a childlike glee.
When the rebels find them, that ship will be coated in blood, hair and turds.
The two villains erupt into a fit of maniacal laughter. Jabbar's eyes begin to wander towards Greedo's inner sanctum.
Now then, Greedo.
The super obese space slug wheezes.
I hope you washed that piss off your legs.
Greedo begins to wince as an elongated and thick tongue unravels out of Jabbar's cavernous mouth and begins to fondle his scaly ankles as it works its way up.
You are one, never change.
Hours later, within the isolation of the Millennium Falcon, Chewie has started to pull hair from all over his body, focusing mostly on the scrotum. Han watches the entire performance with a look of horror and secret passion. After relieving his ballsack of several clumps of hair, his ominous pupils set their gaze upon Han. He starts to stomp towards the smuggler with foam rushing out of his gaping jaw. The grim visage causes a deep sense of dread within Solo, who begins to tickle his own bollocks in order to restore calm order. Han's mind casts itself back to a previous conversation. Within the flashback, the smuggler sits upon a loose-fitting stool whilst staring into the eyes of Chewbacca's previous significant other. They are taking a break from dancing the night away on one of Mijito's best nightclubs. Malatobuk regales Han with the story of how she first met Chewie and how reckless he once was.
How did you ever calm him down?
Han inquires. Mala lets out a strangely quiet yowl which indicates to Han the only technique that ever guaranteed a way out of his stressful moods.
You can't be serious.
Han replies with a tone of disbelief. Malatobuk returns his comment with a strange wink as she downs her space cocktail.
Well, I hope I never have to do that.
Han replied with a secretive semi. The smuggler is thrown out of his flashback by a crazed Wookiee who slaps Han across his face. Chewbacca screams whilst violently rubbing his nipples and running around in a figure-8 pattern. After Han regains consciousness, Chewie begins making tracks towards Solo again.
Do I really have to do this?
Han thinks to himself. Chewie stands proud over the smuggler's face and starts to raise his arms. Han sighs before preparing himself mentally for what he had to do. He had no choice. His hand stretches out to grasp at Chewie's drooping and fluffy member and begins to vigorously rub it like an angry maid trying to get rid of a stubborn stain. Chewie yells in anger and tries to evade the advances, but Han is far too quick and far too persistent. The Wookiee tries to run and thrusts his body all over the ship, but the brave smuggler stubbornly continues to force masturbate, a trick he had learned from Yoda.
Come on, you know you like it, you filthy boy.
Han teases as he uses his left hand to fondle Chewbacca's gooch. The Wookiee tries to hide his pleasure. He had never been touched like this before. Chewbacca takes in every second as his distressed demeanor begins to dissipate. With the fluffy figure fully erect, Han carefully removes his own trousers with careful and practiced precision, never once losing grasp upon his partner's third leg. Chewie releases an uneasy growl, but Han silences his protests with a solitary finger pressed against his bushy lips.
It's okay, pal, no one has to know.
Solo takes the Wookiee's trembling paw and guides it towards the tent rising within the smuggler's tight skivvies. Han bites his own lip in order to suppress the intense moans from the situation he has long anticipated. A crackling of radio static interrupted the sexually charged pair, boners subsiding a little. The dark side of the Force was felt through the craft as an iconic wheezing invaded the spacecraft's passages. Big, shiny helmet, black as the Death Star itself, appeared on the main computer monitor after a few minor flashes sparked it into life. Darth Vader stared menacingly at the two bare penises and for testicles between the hero's legs, licking his dry lips between the bell of his head and the imposing helm. His base was hidden, like a secret. With a tightening tug, he adjusts his faux leather gloves before teasing them with a warning.
You cannot hope to evade the power of the stiffy beam.
To be continued in Episode 3. The Dark Lord Rises.